Hi, I'm Mattie Scariot. I'm the director of the Poppy Jasper International Film Festival, and we're here today with the diversity panel for Mexico Day. I'd like to introduce you to your host, Greg Gomez. He's a widely traveled media and technology consultant, indie filmmaker, nonprofit co-founder and board member, art game designer, and more. Former Fox, Warner Brothers, Disney's youngest founding board member of the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, and a proud supporter of the film festival. I am so excited to introduce you to Mr. Greg Gomez.
Thank you, Mattie. And I just wanted to thank everyone here. It's all familiar faces to me, and I know that we will have a wonderful conversation in regards to diversity, and in particular to the kind of diversity that most of us have been at the bleeding edge of striving towards, which is in regards to the, and then let me just segue with a quick remark regarding labels and terms. We're going to be regarding to this group that has often been called Chicano, Latino, Hispanic, and now Latinx. And so we'll be probably going back and forth between those terms: Mexican American, Cuban American, Puerto Rican American. But this group has been at the forefront for now decades of striving towards greater inclusion, greater diversity in Hollywood in particular, and in most of the media arts and media in general, and in racial justice. That's now been very often discussed in light of last year's incidents in St. Louis. And so with that preface, I'd like to ask our panelists to please introduce yourself. I'll be going in the direction sort of clockwise to me. So I'm going to ask Consuelo to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her and her, specifically her work in regards to diversity and her guild affiliations. I know she's done some amazing work in the past. Consuelo.
Hi, my name is Consuelo Garcia Flores, and I have been working in the area of diversity, inclusion, and equity for a couple of decades now, both as an artist. I'm a visual and multimedia artist, as well as an administrator in the arts, and specifically in working toward greater inclusion. Diversity for me it includes everybody. There's no exclusion in diversity. However, when you add inclusion to that, that means that you are making a concerted to diversify whatever you are working in with more nuance, with more differences, more people. And so for me, the programming that I started many years ago at Writers Guild, and then at AFTRA, and then later on at SAG-AFTRA, was basically to create an equitable playing field, so that it is no longer one person having a ball. It's everybody sharing that same ball and having the same opportunity to carry it through to a touchdown, or through to a home run, or however kind of sports you want to compare it to. But that's what I've done, and I have done more work in the last couple of years to raise the profile of Spanish speaking, specifically monolingual Spanish speaking people in the entertainment industry, as crossover performers, crossover workers in the industry. There is so much more than meets the eye when you just see one. We're not a monolith, in other words. So that's me, and I'm also a visual and multimedia artist.
Thank you, Consuelo. Next, Tery Lopez.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tery Lopez. I am currently the Director of Inclusion and Equity at the Writers Guild of America. It is a union that represents TV, film, and news writers. Prior to that, I worked in the nonprofit world where I had the pleasure of meeting Greg. He introduced me to a lot of people in the industry very early on in my career, as I was working as a temp, or I should say an intern at an independent production company. And prior to NALIP, as I mentioned, I was interning, got a job at this independent production company, then did some development there and some producing. And so that's my background. And I am born and raised here in LA, California. And I like to, you know, when people ask me what my background is, I say I'm Mexican American.
Thank you, Tery. Kirk?
Thank you, Greg. And I'm glad to be here with Frank, Tery, and Consuelo, three people that I certainly admire all the things that you've done, all the doors that you've helped open over the decades, because that's really key. I've spent my career really in three different fields. Media, in 1982, I was honored to be the founding president of the National Association of Hispanic Publications, newspapers and magazines from all over the US. And that the entertainment industry, I've worked on the marketing side of stuff, but also served on a few very key boards. With NALIP, I was honored to be on the board with Frank, and went on to serve as chair shortly after he left the chair to move over to where he is right now. And that, and also with LALIP and the National Latino Media Council that works behind the scenes really to help open doors and that. And then a lot of my career's been on the nonprofit side. But glad to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Kirk. And Frank?
First of all, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Mattie, for inviting me, and pleasure to be on the panel with friends and colleagues I've known. Talking about how long we've all known each other, a very long time. Actually met Greg probably over 20 years ago when we were both aspiring to filmmakers way back when. But I'm currently the executive in charge of diversity programs at the Directors Guild of America. And very similar to Tery's, my position is very similar to Tery's in the fact that I work on inclusion and diversity specifically for Directors Guild of America members. Prior to that, I was an executive at Disney for many years. I worked in helping break in new writers and new directors. I've been at the DGA 7 years, and my job has evolved from being a general diversity practitioner to being focused on being a programs director. And I'm in charge of developing and maintaining programs internally for DGA, as well as being the liaison with all the major studios and maintaining, tracking, making sure, giving best practices with the studios that their programs are running to the level that we expect them to. What's unique about the DGA is that we have contracts with all the major studios, and diversity is actually a contractual requirement, which makes it very interesting. But I came from the filmmaking path. Kirk mentioned worked with him, proud to have worked with him at NALIP for many years, and just really been passionate about trying to open doors for people.
Great, thank you, Frank. So let me start off with the bad news before the good news, because there's a lot of good news, and I want to slant this panel towards the good news. The bad news is I took a little bit, I started out in market research, and I did an informal survey of the situation via Google. And if you happen to Google Hispanic Hollywood, things look not so bad. You Google Latino Hollywood, they're not so bad, but they're not as good as Hispanic Hollywood. And then you Google Latinx Hollywood, and things look really bad. So I know Latinx is the label du jour, and it also is somewhat slanted towards a younger group. So for those folks who identify as Latinx, things look pretty bad in Hollywood. And so I'd like to get your reflections on if that's the case and if we're seeing any progress in light of that. Chime in as you will.
Sure. One of the things in terms of looking at statistics, starting with the Latinos in the US overall, 18.5% of the US population. So sort of use that as that number. Out of USC, they found actors on TV were 5% Latino, actors in film, 4.6, directors on TV, 6, directors in film, 2.7, writers on TV, 8.7, and writers on film, 2.8. And I know others can certainly go more in depth on these various statistics here, but I think in terms of an opening basis, the numbers have not changed meaningfully in
Kirk, was that the study from USC or UCLA?
Actually, it was the UCLA one. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I immediately recognized that that was from UCLA, because UCLA does that is different than USC is UCLA actually focuses on who is employed, not who they are playing in terms of performers. USC will always focus on the characters. Oh, that character was Latin, but it could have been played by someone who was not Latin at all.
Yes.
And so I wanted to make that distinction that UCLA's reports, they're very important, both of them, but one focuses on the employment, whereas the other one focuses on the representation.
Excellent. Yes.
Frank, Tery, any thoughts from your vantage points?
Tery, you muted.
Yeah, I could speak on behalf of writers. I mean, I've been at the Guild now 14 years. And I could say that I've really seen progress, especially now with shows like Gentefied and Vida and One Day at a Time, as we're seeing more and more content creators that are Latin American, Latino, Latinx, whichever they like to refer to themselves as. We see, you know, what's going on, or what has been going on with white able-bodied men. You know, they hire who they know. So we see a lot of these same showrunners, such as Tanya Sriracho, Gloria Calderon-Kellett, people like Natalie Chaidez, who was running Queen of the South for a while. They are more, you know, they're very focused on making sure that there's inclusiveness in their rooms. And because of that, the numbers at the Guild have gone up, not to where we would like to see them. Our numbers are still low at the Guild amongst writers of color. So when we do our report cards every other year, we sort of clump together all the minority groups into one, because that's how low the numbers are. If we put them out like Latinx, Asian, African American, those percentages would be so low. So right now, when you see our reports, they're basically minorities or writers of color. But like I said, I can see the progression heading in a direction where these numbers are getting higher, especially African American writers, Latinx. We just created a new committee at the Writers Guild called the Middle Eastern Writers Committee, because they are totally underrepresented, as is Native American and Indigenous. Their numbers are so low. So we're really trying to work with these groups to get their names out there. And because of our recent, you know, with the agencies that we were just, you know, dealing with the agencies, we had to put together ways to make sure our writers were searchable through the industry at large, because they had to fire their reps during the agency agreement. And so we built a portal called Find a Writer, where executives and fellow showrunners who are also members of the Guild can search for these writers. And I can honestly say that a lot of the requests now coming in from executives and showrunners is way more inclusive than it has been in the past. And they're really trying to make an effort in this space without just saying, oh, we have an Asian character, so we need an Asian writer. So that's what I can say on behalf of what's going on at the Writers Guild and what I see that's going on amongst the underrepresented groups there.
regards to the directors, it's very similar to, as a union, very similar to what Tery is experiencing in terms of representation. But what's interesting is that the DGA has put a lot of energy towards television, because when you look at film and television on other opportunities, television yields the most jobs really as a collective. And we've seen improvements, much improvements in the last several years with television hiring for diversity collectively. And I think that's the thing you have to understand, is that collectively women and people of color are doing better, being hired, they're more being hired, more coming into the pipeline for television directors, but Latinos are so severely underrepresented in relation to our population. And that's a real serious issue. And so I deal with the Latino committee internally, who are trying to figure out ways, working with staff, to improve the numbers of Latino members who are joining the guild. And it's really about education and opportunity, and working with the employers, the studios, to understand how severe this problem is, because it is a very severe problem for our community. And so it's very important to us, to our community, to our guild. It's important to our Latino committee. I think it's important to the health and inclusivity that's a part of the industry in general. But working within the union, you know, there's things that we can do, and we work to develop our members who get in, and we look at ways to increase more folks in the pipeline, and that's what we can do at a union.
So I'd like to jump in because I would like to acknowledge, for example, the Poppy Jasper Film Festival, because independent film is far more, there is far more opportunity in independent film for any person who is considered an other, or who is disenfranchised from the standard development process in the big studios. So independent film is really important to create launching pads. There have been a lot of performers, a lot of writers, a lot of directors that have used independent film. In fact, Ava DuVernay is one of them. Aurora Guerrero is another one. Patricia Cardosa is another. She's they're writer directors, but also performers, and start off in small films that are independent. Or in the case of, like, for example, John Travolta recreated his career based on an independent film. But there is far more representation in independent film. And so independent film is to, or new media is to television what independent film is to studio work. And so the opportunities to create more platforms where directors, writers, performers can really develop their craft is for television is really new media, and there's far more opportunity there.
Yeah. One thing that this brings to mind is, especially in terms of TV and studio productions, having that inside team or person really makes a difference. And I know Frank was key over at ABC along those lines. The key example in terms of the casting that really comes to mind is when Grace Wu became the executive vice president over at NBC of TV casting. Within a 2-year period, there was a 400% increase in Asian Americans on NBC TV shows. And so that was no accident that happened. She went in with a conscious goal and achieved it rather quickly. But that's where you need those inside people quite often. And the other side, in terms of the Latino community, is realizing, I remember where about 8 years ago, Fox was hunting for the next great Latino stars. And they informed the National Latino Media Council, oh, we're going to go out and do a hunt and come back with some great stars. They only looked in Mexico and the rest of Latin America. They did not look at the Latino community here in the US. 64% of all Latinos in the US were born in the US, and there's great talents up here that sometimes get overlooked.
Just springboarding off of what you just said, Kirk, I was having a conversation the other day with Frank about foreign versus domestic Latino, and I was wondering if we could just jump into that debate a little bit. Frank, do you remember what we were talking about?
Oh, yes. There is Greg brought up a good point. There, at least what I've seen with working with directors the last 7 years, that there is definitely within the Latino community, there is by many members, understanding a distinction between Latinos who are born and raised in the United States versus those from other countries. There's been some very successful Mexican directors who won Oscars, and I think we all know who those folks are. And oftentimes our community gets credited for having a Latino that's won. I've heard this many times, but mostly from non-diverse individuals. And there's a frustration because there's so many Latinos to the point of the casting situation that Kirk referenced. There's so many Latinos that are here that are developing their skills through NALIP, through film festivals, getting their stuff going. And there seems to be this black ceiling in terms of opportunities and being hired within the industry. And I think we have to be aware that this is an issue, and we have to work on messaging, understanding that there is a distinction between those Latinos who are from the US, or at least maybe have live here now, versus those who are citizens from other countries who seem to be grouped into this idea that Latinos are doing well. We're not doing well. I think that's the point. Unless was there more, Greg, that I missed, or?
Which led to the epiphany of how, it's all about avoiding risk.
Yes.
It's all about risk aversion.
Yeah, what happens is the studios often hire folks, foreign directors, and not just from Latin American countries, but from Europe and other places, because the employers, the studios, often don't want to, quote unquote, take a chance on emerging talent. They want to make sure they find someone who has done a body of work. And so oftentimes they're looking outside the country, looking for people who probably have a history working non-DJ, non-WJ, non-SAG, finding those folks, bringing them over and saying, oh, we found a Latino. Oh, we found a person of Hispanic descent, or whatever they want to say. And the problem is that risk aversion, from my perspective, this is what I was mentioning to Greg, is a big issue. It's part of the problem that we have in trying to penetrate this issue within the industry, is making folks understand that they take risk letting a Caucasian person get an opportunity. Not sure why there's a higher risk with Latino or other diverse members or other individuals, but that seems to be a threshold that I've seen.
One of the things that I've come to understand, and this was working at the Writers Guild to working at AFTRA to working at SAG-AFTRA, and even in my consultancy work as a diversity professional, equity and inclusion, is that studios don't want to play ball unless there is a built-in audience already there. And that is the biggest problem that virtually any community has. But when there is that premise that they cannot take the chance, then it makes it that much harder, especially for the community such as ours, where art and the people in the United States came to the United States for a better life. And so art and media and anything creative has been put on the back burner because we're all in survival mode. And so that sort of environment is not always encouraged in this community, because we're always working. We're always trying to put food on the table, pay the bills. And when you have that sort of foundation, and then on top of that, you have studios and networks that don't want to take the chance because there isn't built-in audience, then they are going to look outside of the American Latino population to creatives from outside that are not necessarily struggling to survive, but can then have more access to their own creative development. And they have a built-in audience. They have a proven track record. They have all of that. And so that becomes sort of a deficit for our American Latino community.
Yeah, I also think it's all about access as well, and economics. When you think about internally, this is a problem Hollywood has at all levels. If you don't have people in the studio that can greenlight projects, or agents in the agencies that can actually read a script from someone from an underrepresented community and relate to that storytelling, then no matter how good the writing is, we've seen the scripts put aside because there's no connection with the story. When you look at specifically Latinos who are contributing to their households that don't have the flexibility of going straight to college and having their parents pay their rent, and they can take these really low paying jobs in the mail rooms at agencies, we're not going to see that upward mobility within there. It sort of just keeps them out completely. So without access in all these other areas, we're still sort of this revolving door of a problem. So the problem has to be looked at all angles. We can have all the programs we want, but until we're able to allow young Latinos to get into the industry where they can make a living, a lot of times it's just, they have it against them from the very get-go, and they can't sustain these low-paying jobs that they're there 12 hours a day and putting themselves through college. So I think, I mean, and that's not to say it's for every Latino's experience, but it is, I think, a big part of that problem as well.
I'd like to segue to now some hopeful recommendations to our audience who may be, you know, in this group, who are maybe facing adversity in getting their work seen. Let me kick it off with the one strategy, which is common cause, you know, working with other groups to leverage whomever might be in the position to get something done or to be seen. You know, in the nonprofit experiences that I had, I always included non-Latinos in the mix because I wanted the overlapping circles of different groups to kind of synergize and to provide more opportunities than just being in one, you know, mono group. So let's kick it off with that. Anyone?
What's the question?
It's, you know, working with other groups, common cause, other strategies.
Well, for me, I think I mentioned to you in one of our exchanges, Greg, that I think, for example, everyone here has an understanding of a piece of the puzzle. And there are other people in other areas that work specifically in the entertainment industry that are Latinos that have other pieces of that same puzzle. The problem is that we're not collecting all of those pieces in one repository. We're not completing that puzzle. Where some people or some groups are excluding, and they're becoming very cliquish. Oh, you know, I have the relationship with this politician and I'm going to keep that. And that's the wrong approach to take if we're all really trying to make a difference. The pieces all have to be included in order to finish that puzzle and make it make sense. And it's the only way. I think I remember, and I saw both Frank and Tery at an event right before the pandemic shut everything down. And it was, I purposely reached out to several of the leads in that particular, that was launching this organization. It was a partnership. And I never heard back from them. And they really dismiss other puzzle pieces because maybe they're just the edge and it's not the middle. Maybe it's just the piece of the sky and it's not, you know, a face. But people don't understand that every piece is needed to make that puzzle complete. And that is, I think, one of the biggest problems. It's not even just the theory of the crab. It's, you're not even in the same bucket. So that's my take on that.
The thing I'd see out of that, and shifting over to my publishing background with the National Association of Hispanic Publications, our sister organization is the National Newspaper Publishers Association. It was founded so long ago, was founded as the National Negro Publishers Association, and that. And with those two groups, it has been, there's always 10% of each segment, the Latino side and the Black side, that sit there and they don't trust that other group. Oh, you want to use us because you're going to get this or that. But most of those publishers get it. And when those two organizations are working together on a project, it's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 5 in terms of the recognition. And I've often wondered why that isn't done more within the Latino entertainment nonprofits, because I think there could be some great things. I really admire the way both on the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild, everything is under that common office, so that you're in a sense empowered to deal with all the angles.
I'd like to say that, you know, I think we have to look, for example, at the African American or the Black community, how they're light years ahead of our community. I think it's a point that I'm hearing from Kirk and I'm hearing from Consuelo, and I'm assuming Tery has a similar experience, but they work together. That has been an issue. I'm going to echo what everyone else is saying. That is an issue I find even within groups, not to name specific groups, even within groups that have different perspectives and different points of view and don't really want to support each other as well. I see the African American community, and specifically the African American committee at the Directors Guild, and they'll help each other. They'll bring each other up, they'll recommend each other on jobs. They really have this. I see it more consistently with that committee versus anyone else. This is from my personal point of view. And so I think this is and I don't have an answer on how to fix that, or how to, because it is a competitive business. You know, all writers are competing with other writers, directors are competing with other directors, people are competing to get their projects made. So it's a very competitive business, but I think that from a community standpoint, this is the challenge that I've seen within different organizations and different companies and different dynamics that works, that's been a difficult thing for the Latino community.
Yeah, I would agree with Frank. I see that a lot, where the Latino community is so, you know, there's so many different experiences. And, you know, there's the Puerto Rican experience, there's the Mexican American experience, there's, you know, there's the New York experience, you know, and I think we're really quick at judging each other instead of helping each other. And so, as Frank said, the African American community has always been very supportive of one another. And I think I tend to see we're more critical with one another in our own communities, and we have to work more closely. I think I'm seeing it more and more now than when I first got into the industry. But I think you're right, Frank, and Consuelo and Kirk, is like, I think more of a united front would get us way ahead of the game, and we're still sort of on that path to learn how to do so.
Yeah, the key thing that has really bothered me for a long time is with documentaries, especially the major ones that are a documentary series on Latinos in the US, and that when you look down at those individual episodes, who's directing and controlling each of them, about half of them are by non-Latinos, quite often who've never worked in the community, have no idea what they're doing, and they wind up interviewing the wrong people. I remember one segment that they picked this expert from a organization out of DC that is anti-immigration, but the name of it sounds like they're pro-immigrants. And here was their expert on immigration, and it's somebody who believes everybody born in the US, born outside the US, should be kept outside the US. That would never happen in the African American community. It would just not even, the production companies would not even think of doing it, but it happens within the Latino community, and it's unacceptable.
I think part of the other thing is that we have to look at source material. we have a lot of wonderful writers that are, you know, authors that and Kirk, you know that. You have that amazing organization and you highlight Latino authors all the time. Some of those authors, some of those books have been very well received and are starting to gain traction. And so that's a good source for developing into a production.
That's why we now have, sorry to interrupt, we now have the Latino Book in the Movie Awards, and that specifically for that.
And that's a wonderful way to address that risk factor that production companies don't want to spend the money on, you know, this project because it doesn't, it's a gamble, it's a crapshoot. What I find very interesting is that they have the big tentpole things and they don't care to spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars on the most, you know, unnecessary things, but they do it rather than put some of that money into lesser known projects. That said, we need to cultivate those writers. We need to make sure that the source material has the built-in audience and has all of the opportunities that any other source material would, and then make sure that we hold the production companies or the studios' feet to the fire to make sure that they do that, they follow through. They wanted it, they got it, and now they're not doing it. That's not right.
So I have another direction to take this conversation. A few years ago, I was consulting at the crossroads of China, mainland China, and Hollywood. And, you know, the reality is that Hollywood is a global industry. And, you know, we look at our statistics, you know, Frank, you mentioned percentage of Latinos in LA versus Hollywood's, you know, permitting to play on their field, the percent woefully, you know, smaller. And then you look at the, you know, as a nation, you know, percent, it's about 1 out of 5 is Latino, but Hollywood still has these really woefully low numbers. But then when you go up another level and you look at the global market, then it's like, is that the challenge now? Is it because it's a global industry that all of our complaints are on deaf ears? Because the bean counters know that in order to make money back on a production, it's got to do well in Beijing, or it's got to do well in Holland, or wherever else it's being distributed.
I'd like to comment on that. This is based on a conversation Greg, you and I had the other day. I think the challenge is, yes, it is a global approach to distribution of films and television, and you know, all the streaming services have a global reach in different areas. But I think the challenge is, for the Latino community in particular, is that for many, many years, corporate America, the studios understood that the Latino audience within the US is a really fast-growing, strong audience and already pulling in so much money. And that's the problem. The problem is that they already know that they have that audience. There's not an incentive to bring people up. There's not, you know, it's almost kind of reverse engineering when you say, oh, don't they understand that we have this audience here? Shouldn't they bring us into the fold? They should, but they have this audience now without having us in the fold. And so the problem is trying to address that narrative and trying to let them understand that authenticity is important to storytelling, that you have to have people who have lived the experience. And when something is not authentic, we as a community have to speak out about that, because the authenticity is really important to different communities. Not saying that we have to have specifically Spanish-speaking films or Latino-centric characters necessarily, but you want to include us in inclusive storytelling. And I think until we do that, until we get more integrated organically into this machine, there's not an incentive to bring more Latinos in. And I hate to be discouraging about that. I think there's positive things we can talk about too, but that's what I've seen from my perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say it's sort of like, if it's not broke, why fix it? If they're already getting money from this community with what's out there, it's like that's what they're concerned with. But as Frank said, I think we want to see more inclusive storytelling. I just saw the Amy Poehler film this weekend, Moxie, and talk about inclusive as far as the cast. You know, one of the young girls was Afro-Latina, which you don't see a lot of. That's how varied we are as a community. And they had a young girl in a wheelchair, and it was just so refreshing to see that. And I was so happy to see it, but part of me was like, I shouldn't be happy. This should be the norm. This shouldn't be the exception. It should be the norm. But yeah, Frank, I agree with you with everything you've said. I mean, if the money's there, why are they going to try to find a different way to make more money or the same money? I don't think they've figured that out yet.
No, I think that's our job to do, is to figure that out. And then really go after, put them, you know, make them aware of that particular nuance, that if we do have that authentic, you would get so much more. The thing about it is that, as Frank said, Latinos do go to to movies, and not only do they go, they take their families, and then they go with their friends, and then they go with their girlfriends or their boyfriends. They will go and see one movie multiple times. Whereas, you know, other audiences are one and done. But that is the $64,000 question, is how do we make them understand that the more authentic the story, the more money you are able to reap.
We need to play up key statistics, and you know, in the next year when we get the 2020 census data, we'll even have more. But between 2000 and 2020, Latinos accounted for 54% of all the growth in the United States, population growth. And if you look at the non-Hispanic white growth over that same period, it was 2%. And if you look into the future, it's a negative growth factor for non-Hispanic whites. And so for that group of white administrators sitting around the table, you know, thinking that they can keep relating to themselves, they're going to have a much different audience out there that may not be tuning in.
So
Part of
going
me
back,
thinks- well, I was
sorry,
going to
go
say,
ahead.
part of me thinks that that's part of the reason why they are so holding so tightly to those reins, is that they don't want to lose their power. They don't want to lose their authority. They don't want, and what they also do know is that media is the most wide and accessible form of education. You learn through watching stories, through storytelling on television or in film, and or now on new media platforms. But whatever you see then influences how you view each other, and that becomes problematic for people who don't want to relinquish their power.
And I think by seeing less of ourselves, we already know this is an industry that's probably not for us. I mean, that was my experience early on. I remember looking at TV and film credits at an early age and seeing not very many female first names, and even less so Latino last names. And to me, that message said, this is not an industry for you. And it wasn't until I saw the movie Selena and saw the cast and crew was so Latino, and then it said the executive producer was Moctezuma Esparza. And I thought, that's such an ethnic sounding name. If he can do it, maybe I could. And that was sort of, you know, the inspiration. And as Consuelo said, I mean, even looking at names can turn someone off and think, maybe this is not the path I need to take.
So I think there's hope. You know, I polled my Gen Z children for who they might know in Hollywood and media who was Latino in film and TV. And okay, Robert Rodriguez was the #1 person, which was, you know, I have a great deal of admiration for him, and he's done a lot to kick a lot of doors open. Luis from Ant-Man, that's, I forget his last name, but he's another one that's progressed. And Dora the Explorer was the 3rd one. So at least they were more or less positive, in a positive direction. I think, we're seeing more and more, we're not grasping for straws and hoping that this person who might be half Latino or he's Portuguese, but he's close enough, is someone that we can look to as a role model, as an example. Consuelo earlier mentioned all the media that's available, that you can do your own production, new media, alternative outlets for creativity, not waiting to be greenlit. Let's talk about what we can do, what can be done at the creators level, and that perhaps there are more allies available out there who are in a position to help.
Well, what you brought up earlier about partnering with other diverse organizations and communities is key. And that helping get rid of that fear. Oh, if they get it, something is taking it away from us, rather than viewing as making the pie bigger.
I think you have to go in with the right mindset. I find that all the things that I've seen where people have been successful or have been challenged is about having a certain level of expectation. And I'm not saying go into this with a low level expectation because it's a challenge, but after being very positive to what Consuelo said and what others have said, that there are opportunities to be your own person and create content. When I was a film student, we shot 16 millimeter and edited on an actual physical editing bed, as opposed to now where you can shoot on your cell phone, 4K, edit a project. There's no excuse for not creating content, and there's no excuse for not being a student of the industry if you want to be part of the industry. So I think it's really incumbent upon a person to really put that frame of mind, manage expectations, but be prepared.
You mentioned shooting on a cell phone. I mean, Steven Soderbergh proved that you could do it with the right additional aids to your iPhone, with his Unseen and with the other projects that he's produced in recent years. So there's lots of alternatives to the traditional model of waiting for someone to greenlight you.
And there are a lot of writers, a lot of writers that are wanting to get their stories told, wanting to get their stories either published or produced or presented on some platform. And there are now, you can even do that on your own without having to have a whole production team. You just have a camera and yourself, and that's it. And that's an opportunity that anyone can take advantage of and not get permission from anybody.
Definitely. I think there's so many resources now than when we were first getting our starts that it makes it easier for people just to really highlight their skills. So I agree with everything you're saying, Consuelo and Frank.
Are there any other strategies for someone striving to get their unique story out there? We've talked about technology, workarounds. We've talked about common cause, working with other groups. Is there anything else that we might be missing?
Looking at segments of the industry, one that has always puzzled me, once again, focusing on the African-American community, there's over 250 biopics about African-Americans. There's been less than 30 biopics of a US-born Latino. And when you look at, the industry always looks at, how does this movie do? Like chess, okay, everybody's thinking chess now because of Queen's Gambit, that kind of a thing. When you look at La Bamba, Selena, Stand and Deliver, all of those films overperformed compared to what they cost to produce. They made magnitudes more money. And with those kind of successes, it's amazing that we haven't seen a whole continuous slew since then of them, but we just don't see them. And it's sort of a, here's a proven success factor that nobody's focusing on.
I have some advice that I didn't create, but I've heard over the 20 plus years that I've worked with writers and directors, and I think it's pretty applicable to anyone who's wanting to go on this journey. Of course, there's two different levels I see it. There's working professionally within the industry, or continue to be an independent filmmaker and doing what Kirk said, doing documentaries or getting your own voice seen out there, or getting your perspective. But here's a few things that I tell people. Again, I didn't create this. I've heard this and sort of put it together. But you have to ask yourself, if you're especially going to work in the industry, if this is what you really want to do, if there's something that's second best, then you probably could do what's second best, because you have to be so focused, determined, getting into the industry and focused on what you want to do. But there are what I call the 4 Ps to help you prepare for a journey into the industry. First of all, you have to have passion. Exhibit passion in the work, the writing, the directing, the acting, the things that you do. You have to have patience. That's the second P. It takes longer than you expect. It will take longer. You have to be consistent and have the patience to go on the journey as long as it takes you to get there. You have to be persistent. Don't give up. I mean, understand the lessons along the way, but you have to be persistent if this is what you want to do. And preparation. You know, the last P is preparation. What can you do to educate yourself and hone your craft, as well as learn how the business works, or learn what it takes to raise money to do independent films? So I think the 4 Ps will apply to whatever your journey is, but always go back to the 4 Ps and make sure that you're hitting all 4 of those, and that would help you guide you in a career in this direction.
Yeah, I agree. I would say, I mean, I still experience this with, and Consuelo, you could speak to this as well, is writers get their first job and sometimes they just don't continue with the writing. And the ones who continuously write and work on their craft are the ones that you see working. Some people just feel like they got in and this is their set. And that's really not the case, especially amongst writers. So like you said, Frank, preparation is continue to work on the craft. And that's something that the most successful people I've seen, it's because of that. And also networking and continuing your network and staying in touch with people, because you never know if that person you meet today might be the person who has, you know, the power to help you on down the line. So I just wanted to say, and Consuelo, you could jump on board with that, but I think like with the writers, that's one of the things that is true.
I would actually add one more P, and that's to be polite.
Mm-hmm.
And because as Tery said, I mean, we've all known each other for a long while. I've never, none of us knew where we were going to end up, but we all treated each other with, you know, polite respect, and we have integrity. We know that relationships are going to be crucial at any stage of our development, but yet some of us will not treat others very well, and that is not good, because then that becomes problematic later on. I remember that there are 2 things. Yes, I remember somebody telling me, you know, on your way up, don't forget to thank and say please and thank you, because you're going to come back down at some point, and you're not going to, and people are going to remember that you were not nice to them. The other one is absolutely preparation. I cannot tell you how many performers I know who have hit a certain level, and then they say, well, I don't need any more training. I don't need to know that. Well, I already know everything I know. You know, I don't need to know anymore. And that's kind of that's ass backward. You always want, there's always something new to learn. In broadcast journalism, who would have thunk it? But now they're called multimedia reporters, MMRs, and they need to do everything. They need to apply their own makeup. They need to do their own camera work. They need to do their own lighting. And oftentimes it's with a cell phone. And so they always need to learn what's going on. It's always a new step. There's always a new wrinkle in the entertainment industry. I mean, who would have thunk it too, that you could see stuff on your cell phone, or you could do stuff on your cell phone. Here we are. And so it's always about preparation. And then again, the politeness.
Thank you, Frank, for those for the 4 Ps, and Consuelo for the 5th. They're definitely going on to my wall as a place to remind me that those are key.
Well, this has been a very productive panel, a really good conversation, a little bit of a reunion, riffing off of what Consuelo just recommended. We've all known each other a great long time, and I'm grateful to you all for participating on this panel, and I appreciate the experience and the wisdom that you bring to this really, tough and ongoing challenge. And unfortunately, it's never going to ever be solved, and we're going to constantly have to continue fighting for inclusion and for some semblance of justice. And then our children or our nieces, nephews will continue that, and allies. But the example Tery provided with the movie Moxie, and the diversity that was seen in that cast, I think Gen X will do just fine to move the football a little further towards the goalpost, and I hope that further generations will do as well. So thank you all for your participation in this panel. Mattie, would you like to say anything to close?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for doing this. It was very poignant and powerful and so needed. So thank you for participating, and we'll hope to actually see you in person in 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite, Greg.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mattie, too. And
Thank
good
you,
to see
Mattie.
all of you.
Thank you all.
So now that it's, I assume, over.
Oh, you're still recording, Mattie.
I know, and I'm trying to find, oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, but with the